I want you to think of a moment that most women never plan for. You are sitting at your kitchen table late at night. The house is quiet. A conversation from earlier is still playing back in your mind. Perhaps it was an argument. Perhaps it wasn't even loud. Just a sentence that was spoken casually enough that no one else would pick up on, but carried enough weight that something inside of you shifted. You understand for the first time that leaving may one day become a necessity. Not today, not tomorrow, but possibly. And then another thought pops up right away. Where would I go? How would I pay rent? How long could I support myself? You pull out your banking app. You scroll through your account. You begin to calculate in your head groceries, transit, deposits, bills, surprises. The math happens quicker than your feelings. And then the question isn't whether you want to stay. The question becomes whether you can afford to leave. For millions of women, this is where the choice becomes a silent thing that vanishes. Not because they lack bravery, not because they lack smarts, but because they lack something much more useful: money that is solely theirs. This is what financial advisors are increasingly referring to as a walkaway fund. Not an emergency fund for car repairs, not a vacation savings account, not retirement savings down the line. A walkaway fund is far simpler and more potent than that. It is money that will purchase you the freedom to walk away from any situation that becomes dangerous, unhealthy, or limiting, without permission, without negotiation, and without waiting for someone else to save you. And this is the hard truth that most people do not want to discuss. Many women today still do not have one, despite record levels of education, despite rising levels of workforce participation, despite decades of progress towards equality. Financial independence remains patchy, fragile, and temporary. The figures paint a picture that rarely hits the headlines. Women worldwide earn less over their lifetime than men, even when doing the same work. Career breaks to raise families or care for elderly parents or partners' careers mean lower lifetime earnings and pensions. Women are much more likely to take a step back from their career to raise children, care for elderly parents, or support partners' careers. Each choice may seem rational at the time. When taken individually, they lead to economic dependence. Dependence alters the nature of choice. Freedom is not merely the right to make a choice. Freedom is the right to survive the outcome of that choice. The nature of a relationship shifts when it becomes impossible to leave. The nature of a work environment shifts when the loss of the job creates immediate instability. The nature of family relationships shifts when one person has the power to provide access to resources. This doesn't mean every relationship is unhealthy or every partnership unequal. Many households share finances successfully and fairly. The financial gap widens quietly, often unnoticed. By the time many women reach their 40s or 50s, the difference between their independent financial capacity and their household lifestyle can be enormous. They may live comfortably, but comfort is supported by shared income rather than personal financial resilience. And shared income is stable only as long as circumstances remain unchanged. This is where structural realities begin to matter. Across many economies, women are more likely to work in sectors with lower average pay, fewer retirement benefits, and less job security. They are also more likely to take career interruptions related to caregiving, work that sustains families and societies, but often goes uncompensated financially. Unpaid labor creates real economic value, yet it rarely builds personal wealth. A woman may spend years managing a household, supporting a partner's career mobility, or raising children who later become economically productive adults. The contribution is enormous, but traditional financial systems reward income generation, not household stabilization. The result is a paradox. A woman can contribute deeply to a family's success while simultaneously weakening her own financial independence. And because this process happens gradually, it rarely feels dangerous while it's happening. There is another factor that makes walkaway funds difficult to build: psychological trust. Most long-term relationships operate on shared optimism. People assume cooperation will continue because trust is foundational to partnership. Planning financially for independence can feel emotionally uncomfortable, almost like preparing for betrayal. Many women hesitate to maintain separate savings because they fear it signals distrust. But financial autonomy is not the opposite of trust. It is the foundation of voluntary partnership. A relationship where both people can leave, but choose to stay, operates differently from one where leaving would cause financial collapse. Behavioral economists describe this as the difference between constraint based commitment and choice based commitment. Constraint keeps people together because alternatives are costly. Choice keeps people together because staying remains desirable. The emotional quality of those two situations is entirely different. Economic vulnerability also appears in unexpected places, particularly employment. Women are statistically more likely to experience income disruption due to caregiving demands, workplace discrimination, or industries vulnerable to economic downturns. When income stops suddenly, savings become the only buffer between stability and crisis. Without personal reserves, even temporary setbacks can force difficult compromises, accepting unhealthy work environments, delaying necessary life changes, or remaining dependent on others for basic security. And here's the subtle part most financial advice ignores. Financial dependence does not always look dramatic. It often looks comfortable, bills are paid, the home is stable, daily life functions normally. Nothing appears urgent enough to demand change, which is precisely why preparation gets postponed. The absence of crisis creates the illusion that preparation is unnecessary, until circumstances shift faster than financial adaptation allows. History shows that economic shocks, recessions, layoffs, health crises, divorce, or unexpected loss rarely announce themselves in advance. They arrive suddenly, forcing decisions under pressure. A walkaway fund changes the timeline. Instead of reacting immediately out of fear, it creates breathing room. Time to think, time to plan, time to choose deliberately rather than urgently, and time in financial decision making is one of the most valuable assets a person can possess. The uncomfortable truth is that independence is rarely built during crisis. It is built quietly during stability. Small savings accumulated during ordinary months become extraordinary leverage during extraordinary moments. This is why the concept of a walkaway fund is less about preparing for worst case scenarios and more about correcting an economic imbalance that has historically left many women exposed to risk they never intentionally accepted. Because the question is not whether life will remain predictable. The question is whether unpredictability will leave you without options when it arrives. The idea of a walkaway fund is often framed as emotional preparation, something tied to fear or distrust. But when economists look at financial independence through data rather than sentiment, a different picture appears. The need for personal financial security is not created by pessimism. It is created by measurable economic patterns that shape women's lives long before any crisis occurs. One of the most consistent realities across modern economies is the persistence of the gender pay gap. According to findings published in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report, women globally still earn significantly less than men on average for comparable participation in the workforce, with income differences remaining close to a 20-23% gap in many regions. At first glance, a percentage difference sounds abstract. Over decades, however, it becomes structural. A smaller salary does not only mean less money today, it means smaller retirement contributions, smaller investment growth, and fewer opportunities to accumulate independent wealth. Compounding works in reverse when income starts lower. Two people may work equally hard for 40 years, yet one arrives at midlife with dramatically less financial resilience, simply because earnings compounded at different rates. This disparity becomes even more visible when retirement outcomes are examined. Multiple financial studies consistently show that women retire with substantially less savings than men, despite having longer average life expectancy. Analysts have linked this gap to career interruptions, caregiving responsibilities, and wage differences that accumulate gradually across working years. The paradox is striking. Women statistically need more retirement resources because they live longer, yet the economic system often leaves them with fewer. The reason becomes clearer when unpaid labor enters the equation. Around the world, women perform the majority of domestic and caregiving work, labor essential to families and economies, but rarely compensated financially. Research highlighted by UN Women shows women spend roughly 3 times more hours than men on unpaid care and household responsibilities. Economically, unpaid labor creates a hidden trade off. Time invested in caregiving often reduces time available for income growth, promotions, or skill development. A temporary career pause may appear manageable in the moment, especially when made for family stability, but its financial effects compound silently. Missed raises lead to lower future salaries. Lower salaries lead to reduced retirement contributions. Reduced contributions lead to smaller long-term investment growth. By the time these effects become visible, decades have already passed. What makes this dynamic particularly difficult to recognize is that financial vulnerability rarely feels like vulnerability while life is stable. Bills are paid. Shared income supports the household. Daily routines function normally. Dependence does not feel dangerous because nothing appears at risk. Yet stability based entirely on shared resources assumes that circumstances will never change, an assumption economics repeatedly shows to be fragile. Financial shocks rarely arrive dramatically at first. They appear through events that are statistically common rather than exceptional: job loss, illness, separation, or unexpected caregiving responsibilities. Studies examining post-divorce financial outcomes consistently show that women experience sharper income declines than men, often because caregiving roles limit immediate earning flexibility. A widely discussed economic analysis summarized by financial researchers found women's household income can drop significantly following divorce, while men's recovery tends to occur more quickly due to uninterrupted earning histories. Importantly, this outcome does not depend on conflict or wrongdoing. It emerges from structural realities. Financial systems reward continuous participation in paid employment. Any interruption, even one made collaboratively for family benefit, carries long-term consequences. Behavioral economists have observed that people with financial buffers tend to make more deliberate decisions, not more impulsive ones. Security reduces panic. When survival is not threatened, individuals can evaluate choices calmly rather than reacting under pressure. Financial independence, therefore, does not encourage instability. It reduces desperation. A person who can leave freely often chooses more carefully when to stay. What prevents many people from preparing is not ignorance, but optimism. Humans naturally assume continuity. Relationships will remain stable. Employment will continue. Health will cooperate. The future feels distant enough that preparation can always begin later. Yet delayed action carries exponential cost because financial resilience, like retirement savings, depends primarily on time. Small, consistent savings accumulated during stable periods create disproportionate protection later. A modest personal reserve built slowly over years can transform how someone responds to uncertainty. It converts urgent decisions into considered ones. It replaces fear with negotiation power. It turns dependence into choice. Across many countries, a quiet shift has begun to emerge in how women think about personal savings. Increasingly, independent funds are not framed as secret money or contingency planning for failure. They are viewed as autonomy, a practical recognition that life contains uncertainty regardless of intentions. Financial independence is no longer seen as opposition to partnership, but as a stabilizing force within it. What most women don't realize is that the idea of a walk-away fund isn't rooted in pessimism. It's rooted in statistics. Because when economists study financial independence across gender lines, a consistent pattern appears again and again. Women experience financial vulnerability not because they make worse decisions, but because the economic system interacts differently with their lives. Globally, women still earn less, save less, and retire with less wealth than men, even when education levels are equal. A global wealth equity study found that women typically reach retirement with only about 3/4 of the wealth accumulated by men, largely due to career interruptions, caregiving responsibilities, and wage disparities that compound over decades. That difference doesn't sound catastrophic at first. 3/4 still sounds substantial. Until you understand how compounding works, a 25% lifetime wealth gap doesn't mean slightly less comfort. It means dramatically fewer options during moments of crisis. It means fewer months of financial breathing room after a divorce, fewer years before savings run out in retirement, less ability to leave environments that quietly become unsafe or emotionally destructive. And this gap begins far earlier than retirement. According to the World Bank, although more women now have bank accounts than ever before, meaningful financial usage, saving regularly, investing, building independent assets, still lags behind men worldwide. Access has improved, but control over long term financial resources remains uneven. In other words, participation has increased, but autonomy has not increased at the same pace. This distinction matters because financial independence is not about having money pass through your hands. It's about having money that stays under your control long enough to change your decisions. And decisions are where the walkaway fund becomes transformative. Researchers studying household financial behavior have repeatedly found that economic dependence alters bargaining power inside relationships, often invisibly. When one partner controls the majority of financial resources, the other partner's tolerance for dissatisfaction increases, not because they want to stay, but because leaving carries measurable economic risk. This isn't speculation. It shows up in measurable behavior patterns. Women are significantly more likely to delay major life transitions, leaving unhealthy relationships, relocating for better opportunities, or pursuing education when they lack personal savings buffers. Financial constraints quietly reshape what feels possible. The absence of a walkaway fund doesn't just affect emergencies, it reshapes everyday psychology. Imagine two women in identical situations. Both feel unhappy in their careers. Both recognize signs of burnout. Both want change. One has savings covering 6 months of expenses. The other lives paycheck to paycheck. The first woman evaluates her options strategically. She negotiates differently. She considers quitting, retraining, or searching carefully for better opportunities. The second woman adapts instead. She tolerates stress longer. She postpones decisions. She convinces herself the situation is temporary. The external circumstances are identical. The internal freedom is not. Economists sometimes call this optionality, the ability to choose without immediate survival pressure. Optionality is one of the strongest predictors of long-term financial and psychological well-being. Yet it rarely appears in traditional financial advice aimed at women, which often emphasizes budgeting or frugality rather than autonomy. And autonomy is precisely what a walkaway fund buys. Employment patterns across a lifetime make the need for personal savings clear. Women are more likely to experience career interruptions for caregiving, raising children, supporting aging parents, or managing unpaid domestic labor. Each pause may seem temporary, but reduced hours and time off compound into lower lifetime earnings, slower retirement growth, and missed promotions. Over decades, small gaps translate into major wealth differences. That's why researchers emphasize individually owned savings, not just shared household assets. Transitions, divorce, career shifts, economic downturns, health crises are predictable parts of life. A financial plan built on permanent stability is mathematical denial. Independent reserves also change behavior. With a buffer, negotiation and calculated risk feel survivable. Without one, risk feels existential. A walkaway fund isn't pessimism. It's responsible preparation for uncertainty. At first, the number feels insignificant. Then it grows into 3 months of expenses, then 6. And somewhere along the way, something psychological changes. You stop calculating every decision through fear. You stop asking, what if I can't afford to leave? Because you already know the answer. You can.